We're in the Piedmont of North Carolina. This is going to be the site of a Palmer pigweed test, or at least a big demo that we'll make some videos of as time goes on over the course of the year, and we'll have that, you'll get to see from the beginning to the end that way. And I can remember back, probably been 15, maybe 20 years ago, the first Palmer pigweed I saw up here came off a dairy farm. That surprised me first. It came out of Stokes County, which surprised me secondly, because that's not a huge grain county. But it turns out this guy had gone down to the southern part of the state. He had hauled back some cottonseed meal to bed his dairy cows in, and then as part of the waste, that all got spread out on the land. And it came from an area that had heavy Palmer pigweed, and we've had Palmer pigweed up in this part of the country ever since then, and it continues to spread. So, you know, I don't know if you can see behind me, there's some flags stuck around in this field, and we're going to look at different modes of action, multiple modes of action. We're going to look at various things in this field that will show Palmer pigweed control, and hopefully you'll learn some things as we go through the course of the year. All right, let's talk just for a minute about identifying a Palmer pigweed. There's lots of different pigweeds out there. Predominant species around here is the red root pigweed. They look very similar. We also have in the area some water hemp that's beginning to come along, and they look pretty similar too. So you need to know what's a resistant pigweed and what's not. This is one we found in the field. It's been sprayed. It's got some burn on it. It's not pretty, but it will certainly do the job as we talk about identifying this thing. If you go down into the plant, and sometimes you've got to get a little ways down in there to find a leaf with a full petiole, and you fold that petiole over the leaf. If the petiole is longer than the leaf is long, then we have a Palmer pigweed. That won't be the case for water hemp, and it won't be the case for red root pigweed either. Now, another thing you can do when you're looking at identifying these things, the bad pigweeds are smooth. They don't have hairs on the leaves, nor do they have hairs on the stems or the petioles, whereas a red root pigweed is going to be kind of rough feeling if you run your fingers along the leaves or the stems or the petioles, because it's got a lot of little short, stiff hairs on there. So you can use the rub your finger along it test. You can use a magnifying glass or a hand lens and look for hairs, but the bad pigweeds are smooth. The good one, or the better one, or the controllable one, is rough because of those hairs. And it's really important that you identify those things early, because we can have some issues when they get too big, trying to get control again. It's about the third week into June now, and obviously the soybeans are up behind us. You can see them. They were planted the 22nd of April. They came up exactly 7 days later. Stand was great. We had moisture. We didn't know we were getting ready to dry out. And the whole month of May caused a problem with everything we're trying to do here. This is a Palmer pigweed management demonstration, but the month of May did not rain. It was cool, it was dry, it was windy, and when it was time to spray again, we had no weeds whatsoever. So we put everything off like most farmers have had to do, and we're adjusting to what the conditions have given us. And we'll talk a little bit about this stuff as we go along. But basically what I want to talk about today is the pre-emergence applications and what we've done with pre-emergent work and what we have seen as our results so far. We have sprayed the post, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But for the pre-emergence, we've got this field behind me blocked off into 3 big blocks. And across all 3 blocks, we sprayed a 14-2 material. That would not be my product of choice where we've got Palmer pigweed, because only the group 14 is going to be effective in control of Palmer pigweed. And I think you need to have more than one effective mode of action as you're trying to control a resistant weed. That's been the issue that's gotten us in trouble for years, is using one mode of action until that mode of action no longer works, and then we go looking for something else. In much of North Carolina and much of the United States, a group 14 no longer gives us control anyway. It still does here. So in block 1, all the way up by the road, we've got just a 14-2 material. In the middle block, we added some pendimethalin, so we've got a group 3 in there too. We've got 2 effective modes of action. And in this block right here directly behind me, we added in pendimethalin and metribuzin. So we've got 3 effective pre-emergent modes of action in this lower block. And we'll look at the weed control that we got out of it. One thing you're going to notice in this field, if they show up well in the video, are these orange flags that we stuck around. And prior to spraying our post-emergent products, I came through with the orange flags, and I flagged Palmer pigweed. I didn't try to flag every one that was out here because I didn't have enough flags, first off. But if you're familiar with Palmer pigweed, you know where a plant falls over. Oftentimes you'll have a cluster of them. So an orange flag might represent a cluster of 4 or 5 plants that were there at the time. It might represent one plant. So I didn't try to get actual numbers, but I did try to show distribution across the block. Now, one of the interesting things that came out of this was in this upper block where we are right now, where we only had one effective mode of action, our pre-emerge broke down quicker. And there's 48 flags in this one upper block. There's not even 20 flags in either of the 2 lower blocks where we had more effective modes of action. The distribution across the block is pretty similar. We've got pigweed on the front end, the back end, the edges on all 3 blocks. We just have more in this upper block where we didn't have as many effective modes of action. And the other thing that was very noticeable was this block broke loose quicker. So our Palmer pigweed was a little bit bigger when it came time to put the post-emergence on than it was in the other 2 blocks. Both things to keep in mind if you're using a product with a single mode of action. All right, we're back out here in this field again. Again, this is at one of the orange flags where we marked some Palmer, and I have 3 right here around this flag. I've moved the flag over for video purposes, but it was right in the middle of the triangle. This is a Palmer plant, and when you pull it up, it breaks loose. The roots are nice and gone. It's very flaccid. It's lost all its turgor. The leaves are all gone. It's drying up. That was a Palmer that was at the right size for control. And you know what? We got good control of it with dicamba and Roundup. So primarily the dicamba. And we'll move over to the left just a little bit, and I'll come to one that was just a little bit bigger. And if we pull that plant up and look at it, we've still got white roots. We've still got turgid stems. We've curled it. We've bent it. We've burned on it. But I don't think that thing's going to die. It's been sprayed now for about 10 days. We've still got a lot of green. It's still upright. And it was kind of tucked in under this soybean plant, so coverage might not have been exactly perfect. And I think we're going to miss that one. And again, it was a little bit bigger than that 4-inch stage. If you look at that, that's probably 12 inches tall, 10, 12 inches tall. So it was a little bit too big for what we were trying to do, given what the label tells us will give us control. We're going to move over one more time to this one right over here on the other side. And this one, it got dicamba and Liberty. And compared to the dicamba alone, you can see where the Liberty has given us quite a bit of burn, but our stems are still turgid. We might have lost a lot of leaf matter on this thing. If you get rid of all the dead stuff, that's what we got. We've got live roots, and I firmly believe that every one of these leaf nodes will sucker back out, and that plant will continue to grow, because for the products that we have available to us, this Palmer pigweed was too big. Now, if you've ever done any kind of field work, you know that things don't always go exactly as you plan. Sometimes they go way different than you plan. And this row right here on my left is exactly an example of this. From this side going that way, it's a Liberty dicamba bean. From this side going to my right, it's a dicamba bean only. I kind of thought with a 30-inch row, I had a little bit of leeway, and I might not have a problem spraying the Liberty over on the other side. But I did. My boom hung over just far enough that a single nozzle put a little bit of Liberty on these non-Liberty beans, and so I've got a row right down through the whole plot that's looking pretty bad. And that's an example that even at a half a rate of Liberty, since we didn't have the 2 nozzle overlap, even at a half rate, we can have quite a bit of damage. You certainly have to be sure with all these new technologies that you know where they're planted, that you've got the right herbicide combination going out on them. Here we are back in the soybean field. It's September of 2021. We're wrapping up several months worth of video on pigweed control, and today's the wrap up for it. So we're going to talk about a few things that we've gained in this time we've spent. And one of the big things is, you know, shade is greatly important, and you'll get to see that in some of the other video that comes out here just a little bit. But shade is a great way to help control pigweed. We've also reinforced the idea that multiple modes of action are going to be necessary, and not just any mode of action. It's got to be one that works on a palmer pigweed or a water hemp, because we've got both of those in our area now. And when we started this process, we didn't know we had as much water hemp as we did. So, it's got to be multiple modes of action. You got to use some pre-emerges. I would like to see people plant a little on the early side, use a good pre-planted or sprayed as close to planting as possible, and then come back in a very, very timely manner with a good post-emergent application of something that's got another residual in there, and hopefully something that's got more than one mode of action. One of the things that we've talked about over and over to growers and on videos and all is don't get set with the same program and using minimal modes of action. Use multiple good, effective modes of action. Change them around where you can. Try to change them around in the rotational crop. And you know what? We may not get rid of these problem pigweeds, but we can keep them minimized and managed down to a reasonable level.